What the Actual Fork podcast is co-hosted by two intuitive eating registered dietitians, yours truly, Sammy Previtt, owner of Fine Food Freedom, and Jenna Warner, owner of Happy Strong Healthy.
We can't stand diet culture bullshit and love keeping it real. Our mission is for all humans to believe that they are made for so much more than chasing a smaller body. We are also here to share with you that food can be fun and pleasurable again.
Although we are medical professionals, we are human beings too. We are not afraid to share our deepest, darkest secrets and how many years of our lives were taken by diet culture.
We started this podcast so no human has to feel alone in their journey towards food freedom. So get comfy and join us for a casual combo where you can expect to laugh, cry, learn, and grow.
We are so grateful that you're here. So if you enjoyed this podcast and want to connect further, we invite you to follow along on Instagram at WhatTheActualForkPod and subscribe, rate, and review our podcast so we can continue to share this message with more and more people. Now, let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of What the Actual Fork podcast. Today was a big one. Today was a big one.
We even said this guest needs no introduction.
Literally, like I feel like we could just cut the intro here, but we had the amazing co-founder of Intuitive Eating, Evelyn Tribole, on, and we don't even have her bio pulled up, but I feel like we don't even need to, because if we just say Evelyn Tribole, you probably know who that is. If you don't, just Google Evelyn Tribole, because she is the co-founder, the co-author of Intuitive Eating. And I feel like the reason that we started this podcast in the first place.
And I don't want to ruin it because we do talk about this like almost immediately when we start the episode, but Evelyn has had a huge impact in the growth of our podcast. And I don't even want to say it because it's going to conflict with us sharing it once the episode starts. But the previous episode that we've done with her was, can you lose weight while intuitively eating? And I know it's one of the number one shared episodes that I've ever shared personally.
Same.
And I'm sure you agree. So
yes. And for maybe, let's say for those who were not OGs of our podcast and maybe they've started listening more recently, I'm not going to say what, but our podcast used to operate under a different name. And
Please
so
we
do, I'm not, because we're going to cringe. I cringed when I said it on the episode. But so you will hear a little bit about why we changed our name and how Evelyn was a really important piece in that. So anything else you want to say, Jenna, or should we just get into it?
Yes, I do want to share super quickly just the newest review that we have from someone named Erin_Wooge, Wooge, just because it's like perfectly aligned with this episode today. She says this podcast is a must listen. If you are new or experienced in intuitive eating, this podcast is for you. If you have dieted your whole life, start here to learn how to enjoy being in your body without trying to change it. These two girls have made my 45-minute commute to school a joy. I've been on and off dieting since I was 12 years old, and at 20 I'm so exhausted of diet culture and body stigma in every aspect of life. I'm getting married in July and have faced the wedding day diet temptation. I'm mid-sized and struggle with adapting to this being my body. I have fallen in love with movement because of the way I feel, and I've gotten into eating foods that I love. So thank you to Sammy and Jenna for helping me really learn how to listen to my body. I am obsessed. Thank you so much.
What an amazing way to get into this and to like just start the intuitive eating conversation. And thank you so much to Erin for leaving that review. And if you're listening to this and we've sparked some joy in your life on your morning commute or walk or whatever you do, please, please, please leave us a review. Let us know, your honest feedback about our podcast, and feel free in your review to also just let us know what you want to hear more of, because we want this podcast to be really whatever you want it to be.
So welcome back to another episode of What the Actual Fork podcast. Today we have the guest from are you ready for this? Most downloaded episode ever.
Oh, really?
Of What the Actual Fork podcast, back with us today. Evelyn, thank you so much for being here.
I'm thrilled to be here.
We're so excited. And we start every episode by asking our guests the same question that has changed since the last time you were on our podcast.
Oh.
But is there anything in the recent media, social or not, or in life that has stopped you in your tracks as it pertains to or relates to nutrition, wellness, diet culture that has made you say, what the actual fork?
No, you know what? Because I think nothing will shock me anymore when it comes to diet culture. I have this philosophy or this attitude that's kept my sanity that diet culture is like fashion. It comes and goes. There's always going to be the newest, latest, greatest. But I think the thing, it didn't stop me in the tracks, but I'm thinking, oh, thank God they're naming it, is this idea of the almond mom, because I've been noticing that. And it's one of the reasons why one of my messages is that the idea of changing diet culture is so daunting. But if we can actually look at the possibility of ending the legacy of diet culture at your kitchen table so that your kids don't suffer the way that maybe you've been suffering, I think is incredibly aspirational. And it's not to throw, parents under the bus, but I think it's also important to recognize the context at which how it impacts us. It's profound suffering, actually.
Oh, I love that you brought that up. And Jenna and I actually just did an episode a few weeks back on what is an almond mom. And we kind of really dug into that. So that's perfect. And I love how you brought that to, can we just look at what's on our kitchen table and our relationship with food? Because I know when I first heard the intuitive eating anti-diet message, I wanted to shout it from the rooftops and I was trying to convince everybody. And then I think it was honestly, you were one of the first people, and we had this later in our notes in the episode, that you said the words to us on our previous podcast. Are they reachable? Are they teachable?
Oh,
because if they're not, you need to preserve your mental energy, and it's not your role to convince people not to diet or to become intuitive eaters. So you have no idea how much your words have helped us.
Well, and let me also clarify, those words come from my mentor, Desiree Attaway, who's my social justice leadership coach and I call friend. And so that comes from her. So I've added just a little bit. Are they reachable, teachable, and ready? And do I have the bandwidth to engage? Because the thing is, I don't want you or anyone else in this field to be burning out. And if we engage with every troll, or even someone who's teachable, reachable, and ready, but you don't have the bandwidth, it's okay to let someone else take that on. We need to watch our own energy. So in relationship to that too, one of the things I've been, it's funny. I think I unintentionally listen for reactions on things I say. And when I keep getting a similar good reaction, then I end up saying it more. Does that sound weird? But what I've been noticing lately with diet culture rhetoric, when I've been doing interviews, I talk about how dieting and diet culture is suffering. It is such a source of suffering. And intuitive eating is a pathway out of suffering with 10 principles. And for some reason, when I talk about it like that, I get more open engagement. It's not like we're up with trying to talk about the dismantling of everything, even though we need to, but it gets people's attention because people suffer in that realm, as because you've done all this work in this space.
Oh yeah. I mean, you think about when you sit down and chat with them and, how have the past 5, 10, 20, 30 years of your life looked in diet culture? And I think suffering is a great word that I think so many people can relate to, but it doesn't have to be that way. And intuitive eating is that vessel and that vehicle. So it is crazy that we have not chatted with you since 2020. I feel like I've seen you. I know Jenna and I obviously follow you on social and we've been keeping up with your life updates, but we wanted to create a space for you. We've had a lot of growth and changing on this podcast. And I don't know if you remember this, Evelyn, but our podcast used to be called Drunk Dietitians.
I remember having a conversation with you about it too.
Heck yeah, we did. And we were already at a place where we were like, why is this our name? Like, this isn't serving us. This doesn't align with our morals and values. And then we had that conversation with you and it just all clicked for us that we were like, it's time for a change, for a better. So we're so happy to have you back as What the Actual Fork podcast. But we wanted to create space for you of just to say like any life updates you want to share with listeners. I know that, Jenna and I know a lot about your story, but we wanted to create a space where is there anything that you want to share with our listeners, whether it be personally or professionally, that since 2020 to now, what has been going on in Evelyn's world?
I will, and this is going to get really, personal. And I start off by saying I didn't used to have regrets in life, and now I've got 2. The first regret was missing mammograms. And the second regret was eating a ginormous burrito on my first day of chemotherapy. And so there's a lot between those regrets. So what happened was, and as you probably know, I was, to me, shockingly diagnosed with breast cancer stage 2 that required the trifecta of treatment. I had chemotherapy, surgery, and radiation. And what was so shocking about it is that I had just gotten home from a surfing trip in Hawaii, and I had this lump, but I thought I dinged my breast on a surfboard, and then I've actually had to look at this. It's like, oh my God, was there some unexplored diet culture that I felt okay blowing off mammograms? Because, my dad was dying in 2020. I had a book deadline in 2021 or whenever that was. And it's like, oh, I'll get one, another time. Because the truth is, perhaps if I had gotten it earlier, they would have caught it earlier and I wouldn't have had as much treatment as I have had, and it has really changed me profoundly. When I made that comment about eating a ginormous burrito, I love telling that story because it was one of those weird days where my eating was inconsistent. And when you're in chemotherapy, it was like 4 or 5 hours and I was starving. And when I am that level of hungry, I know a ginormous burrito is going to hit the spot and I love it. And so my cousin took me, got this ginormous burrito, didn't even think twice that, maybe I ought to reconsider. You just had chemotherapy and it might not land very well. And I'm not going to tell you all the details, but I think the reason it's a good story is, here, I'm co-founder of intuitive eating. I was connected to my body, but I didn't give it the grace and the space that, oh, maybe my body's changed a little bit with this chemo. And so fast forward, I've just now started telling this part of the story. I got in a actually, this is the first time I've gone public with this. It is the first time I got really in a dark place in my life. I was 3 months into chemotherapy, in therapy, and I told my psychologist, I said, look, I'm not suicidal, but I don't want to live. I was in tears and I was just absolutely miserable. It's an awful place to be in chemo. And he said to me, Evelyn, you need something to look forward to. You need something to look forward to. And I took that to heart. And so I was at a place in my life where I was too exhausted. I was too nauseated to lay down and too exhausted to sit up. And in that time, I decided I'm going to plan a month's trip to Hawaii to go surfing, in spite of the fact that my body was in no surf shape. And every doctor I saw, when can I surf? When can I surf? Even though I was in no shape to surf. So long story short, I finally got clearance. And my dear brother-in-law, oh my God, I was so weak that I couldn't even balance 5 seconds on one foot. My physical therapist had me do these, what they call baby planks, where you're on all fours, just rocking back. That's how weak I was. So my brother-in-law would carry my surfboard into the water, and I was too weak to catch my own waves. And so he would push me into the waves. And that's how I got ready. And I thought, you know what? I need to be flexible. It's possible my body won't be ready to surf in Hawaii, but I can still enjoy it and do other kinds of things. Anyways, fast forward, long story short, what ended up happening during all my treatment, all the scary stuff that happened, I kept visualizing myself being on this longboard and looking at the turquoise wall of waves in Hawaii. And I made it there. And surfing has now become my passion and my lifeline. And that's in part of that. And so when you talk about the joy of movement, it gives me so much joy and so much connection. And I realize that's a lot of personal information that I just offered up, but I think it makes me human. So
thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. And you just inspired me to be nicer to my husband, because he's a surfer and I always give him so much crap for wanting to surf as much as he does.
Oh my God.
But hearing you describe it, like, okay, I get it.
I am so happy surfing. And in fact, I was just at a women's surf clinic, and this woman who I didn't even know, she goes, Evelyn, you've got so much joy about surfing. And I was like, yeah, I do. And you know what? It is so much harder than what it looks like. I've never worked so hard on something and have such little to show for it in terms of my consistency. But it's just being out in the water, even if I don't catch a wave, is a very happy day. So yeah.
I went surfing one time with him. We were very new. We've been together 12 or 13 years now. It was like our first trip ever together. And I caught my first wave. He was so proud of me. Then I got up on the board again, and it went nose first into the water, came back, knocked me on my face. And I was like, never again. But you're inspiring me, because it just sounds very peaceful. It sounds like exactly what we want movement to be for our clients. And people.
Exactly. And that surfing is for all bodies, and there's Elizabeth, also known as Curvy Surfer Girl on Instagram, who's really out to change the field of surfing, because it's been the typical thin white cis woman who gets plastered as the surfer girl. When you look at the origin and the roots of surfing, you know, with the Hawaiians and bigger bodies and so forth. So she's doing a lot to shake that up. We should all have access to this kind of joy. And I'll quote her, and she says, the ocean accepts all bodies. I love that. Yeah.
Oh, that is
isn't that beautiful?
so beautiful.
Yeah.
And that is something that, first of all, again, I just want to echo Jenna would thank you so much for feeling safe enough to share your story here and to share this information with us. And like you said, we're all just humans here, and it does humanize us, and it brings so much light to what you've been through. And I would love to hear, you know, you shared so much about your personal story. What do you think? And I know we wouldn't know what it would be like because we don't know life without intuitive eating at this point, but how did intuitive eating shape your breast cancer journey? Or how do you think it impacted your relationship with body and food? Or is there a way to look in a crystal ball and say, how would it have been if you were in diet culture versus through your intuitive eating lens?
Oh yeah, that's an excellent question. You know, it really taught me to be kind to my body and to really listen to it. You know, there's been a lot of profound research, for example, on exercise and cancer treatment and survival. But there were times I had so much pain I couldn't even walk out the door. It was really, and I gave myself grace on that, including not being able to eat, having a lot of difficulty with that. So I was grateful for the foundations of intuitive eating, and also recognition that our bodies change, our appetites change, the foods that I could tolerate were just so different, you know. So it gave me, I've always had a lot of compassion for my patients, but I think it's even deeper. You know, when you're in that place, you know, you need to eat and you just don't wanna. You just don't wanna. And so it's looking at, you know, nourishment as self-care. And we talk about that a little bit, you know, in the book and in the workbook, that what do you do when your hunger is offline, or actually you're nauseated and you want nothing to do with food. And so we need to look at this with kindness. You know, we're biological beings and we need nourishment. And so maybe the issue, we talked about satisfaction. For me, satisfaction wasn't what sounds divine. It was like, oh my God, what can I tolerate? What do I have the energy to prepare, if at all? And by the way, I had friends and family that were willing to do all that stuff. And as a side note, that was one of the beautiful things, the gifts, the silver linings of all of this, is to see people just step up. You know, I have a friend who lives in Malibu, which is about 2 hours away from where I live in Southern California. And he would drive down just to walk with me. I said, you know what would help me the most is people to walk with me. I can do my own meals. And he would do that. And even the intuitive eating community on social media, oh my God, the letters and the cards, it's just, I still have a big stack because I read them every once in a while. They're just so, you know, uplifting. And so I think the messaging is, you know, intuitive eating is about your agency and your body. And no matter what seasons we are in life, or in maybe even in disease states, that there are ways that we can access that with kindness and compassion. And I'll just say it was just really humbling, because I just never thought that would be my story. And yet here it was, you know? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I was just going to echo what you said. I loved how you brought in how no matter what season of life you're in, how intuitive eating can just kind of, let's use the wave analogy, can ebb and flow like a wave, right? And
oh my God, yeah.
And we've had a few clients at Find Food Freedom who have gone through chemo and cancer, and I'll get that question. I'm sure, Jenna, you get that question, and Evelyn, you as well, of like, can I be an intuitive eater if I have a medical disease or condition? And it's like, absolutely.
And, you know, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. But that's when you want to work with a professional who's trained both in medical nutrition therapy and intuitive eating. But I'll tell you kind of an exciting thing to me, because my mind is still there with intuitive eating and the research. You know, I'm a geek. So I had somebody who's become certified, who's actually a researcher with the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, and they're going to do an intervention study on intuitive eating and cancer patients. This is rare form of cancer that affects families, in which you get different kinds of cancers in body parts, and you lose limbs and lose lives. And there's lots that go on. And what they're seeing is that they're high risk of eating disorders because they're feeling guilty, because they're not following the healthy way to prevent cancer and all these things. And so it's actually really exciting to see this, because of the parts that, you know, intuitive eating is about agency, and it's about doing what feels right for your body. And yes, we can still mix in the gentle nutrition, but without clubbing someone, you know, over the head with that kind of thing. So it's interesting to see all the ways intuitive eating can really, really apply. It's exciting.
So speaking of exciting, congratulations on your New York Times article.
Oh,
that was incredible.
That was wild.
And I just saw actually on your Instagram of it, because I saw the article, but your Instagram actually clarified some of the things from the article that were maybe misrepresented.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a backstory here that we really haven't talked. Actually, Elise and I did a live on it, but we didn't save it. So here's the backstory. So first of all, it was so exciting to get contacted, and they said, we want to profile you. This wasn't like, who are the women behind this, model? It's like, oh my God, this is fantastic. And the journalist that was interviewing us does, celebrity profile pieces. So thrilling. And then we did, Elise and I did, I think, at least 3 good-sized interviews, and it was supposed to run in August and it didn't run. And then next thing we know, it's like, my editor wants me to fly down from New York to have dinner with you all. So we ended up having this amazing 3-hour dinner, and it was fantastic, and talked about intuitive eating. And the writer even says the first time she's ever been out with women who actually enjoy their eating and are not apologizing or explaining why they're eating or not eating this particular thing. But then it got really interesting. We ended up with a total of about 7 interviews, including that dinner we had. And the last 3, there was a lot of pushback, and it wasn't coming from the writer, it was coming from the editor. And I said to the writer, I said, I'm really concerned about what this piece is going to end up being based on these kinds of questions. They were diet culture questions and all this rhetoric. And this one I love. It's a good example of taking science out of context. At one point she calls and she said, hey, I just talked to this weight scientist, and they were saying that research shows that people in large bodies can't feel their fullness. And I said, well, first of all, I haven't read that study, and I really, to make an informed comment, I really need to read it. But just from what you've told me, I said, let's step back for a moment and think about this population. If this is somebody in a larger body, especially if they've been larger since they were a kid, there's a high likelihood they've been put on diet after diet after diet, or been told you shouldn't eat these foods. And we know that has an effect on the brain in terms of all of the, we talked about restraint theory, the what the hell effect. When you think you can't eat something, then something happens to break that restraint, and then boom, all the foods. So that right there could explain that. I said, but send me the study, I'll take a look at it. And she sends me the study, and I read it. I go, oh my God, are you fucking kidding me? It was a study on rats that this researcher used to state with authority why intuitive eating is a problem. And yeah, and since this reporter was more of a profile piece kind of person rather than a science piece, anyway, it was just really interesting. And yeah, there was a lot of stuff we wish would have made it into the story. We gave lots of researchers to talk to, a lot of our patients and so forth. But overall, hey, we got into the New York Times, and we don't want to sound all whiny and complaining about that. So that's the good news. And from that, we ended up being on the Tamara Hall show. That was really, really fun. So the fact that it ended up becoming a bigger story, ended up being 3,000 words and 2 photos, that intuitive eating garnered that much space. But then I had a colleague that said, Evelyn, when you read that, please don't, I advise you, I suggest that you don't read the comments for your mental health.
Well, so that was going to be my follow-up, is like, since we've spoken to you, I think intuitive eating has always been a household name, but it's so much more than that now. Like, I think that piece and the press that you've gotten, and Sam's been on the news with the intuitive eating message, I think twice since we've interviewed you. I think that message has spread so wide. And I think this is a bigger question, but I'm curious to start it out. Like, how have you seen intuitive eating evolve over the past few years?
Oh, well, there's a couple ways we can look at it. We talked about the evolvement in terms of Elise and I evolving the model. And then we can look at what's happened in social media and media and those kinds of things. So it's actually a positive trifecta, perfect storm of things happening, that we've got now almost 200 studies on intuitive eating showing benefits. So we got the validity there. Then we have legacy media like the New York Times and other big media outlets who are really covering intuitive eating. And then when you look at social media, I mean, last time I was at TikTok, it has over 1.7 billion with the B hashtags on intuitive eating. So it's very exciting. It has tractions in all these domains, but the tricky thing is when you have that many hashtags in social media, it's open for a lot of confusion, which is why actually my most popular post, and I probably need to rerun it, I haven't run it in a while, is how to spot fake intuitive eating. because
we have that one pulled up right here and we wanted to talk about it with you, because that's where the last episode we had with you, Evelyn, you said, if you want to be confused about intuitive eating, look up #intuitive eating on social media and you won't know what the hell is going on. So would love to hear you continue to speak on that.
Yeah. So one of the biggest ones is if someone is recommending weight loss as with intuitive eating, run away. They don't know what they're talking about, and but there was a big conference, I think at the fancy at the food at the, I can't even remember what it stands for anymore. The big conference for dietitians where someone was talking about intuitive eating and weight loss. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? So what I did, the reason I made that post is so that if anyone on social media, rather than getting into the weeds and debating someone, they can say, hey, go look at this post dated by the co-founder. And that'll show you right there that, and the first principle of intuitive eating is reject the diet mentality. So it's how is dieting? If you look at intuitive eating, part of the roots, the origin story of intuitive eating is Elise and I we were witnessing so much suffering in our patients through dieting. One. Secondly, we were recognizing that our traditional ways of looking at exchanges and trading this food with that food was not actually helping. And so between going to the literature and factoring in our experiences, one of the first principles was reject the diet mentality. And this is all about, as you know, cultivating a healthy relationship with food, mind, or body. It's not about changing the size of the body. And so that's where it gets to be really, really problematic when people are using our work and they are, co-opting it. And because it has become so popular, it is those kinds of things can end up happening. I guess those are positive problems to be having, but yeah, it's an issue.
I was going to say with that.
I saw one the other day that said how intuitive eating macro counting plan. I was like, what? Like
every time I see this stuff, I just think of like, what? Like, how do Evelyn and Elise feel? Like they must be cringing when they see their amazing work, then being misconstrued in this way. But so Evelyn, you brought up, the big red flag, right? If someone says intuitive eating and weight loss or intuitive eating and macro counting, but I would love to hear if you've seen, and I'm not going to say names. I know Jenna and I are two dietitians and we all make mistakes and that's how we grow, right? People hopefully call us in kindly to say, hey, I think you missed the mark here. And can we look at how this can affect people? If you see dietitians or other medical professionals that are spreading the intuitive eating message, but maybe they just stop with the like, eat the damn cookie. And then it kind of stops there. Maybe they're not doing the work to dismantle fat phobia or talking about the racist roots of diet culture. Or how do you address them? Do you call them in? Do you have any suggestions for Jenna and I of, because sometimes it can be really hard when you're like,
question.
They get it, but they're not
but they don't
there.
So I'll tell you where I've seen the issue. And that is with health professionals who've read the book and now they think that I can do intuitive eating as a dietitian, for example. And the feedback I hear over and over again from people that have taken my training, which you have, is there are so many nuances, both with the research and in the cultivating of intuitive eating. It's not this rigid thing that I've had people say to me, Evelyn, I thought I was doing intuitive eating correctly with my patients, but I realized I was creating some harm. Oh, and you're raising your hand.
That was me. Yeah. And Jenna and I both talk about that for how many years we felt like we were for so long, I thought, okay, I can have one foot in not diet culture, but one foot in healthy, intentional weight loss, heavy air quotes, and one foot in intuitive eating. And then through dismantling that and realizing, oh no, I'm fence straddling. I have a splinter in my ass, as Fiona Sutherland calls it. And we need to get off this fence and get over to the intuitive eating side.
Yeah. So that's part of the issue. And so, to answer your question, what do I do when I see this? It's happening with such regularity that if I spent all my energy going after people, then I wouldn't have the energy to do the things I'm doing in terms of creation, in terms of the trainings. And actually, Elise and I are going to be updating the intuitive eating workbook starting in the fall. Sometimes what I will do is I do contact people. I usually do it. I don't like doing it over social media. There's not enough room for nuance. So I might DM them and say, hey, and I would love for you to take our training to really understand the nuances and the research of intuitive eating. So that's something that you could do. You're asking, some action points that and actually, this is up to you, but I find when you've had your own personal story that you used to do something like that, and you can say, hey, I used to kind of do the same things you're doing. And it wasn't until I think I talked to you or emailed you and said, hey, I think you should take the training, Sammy. And then you saw the differences. So I think when you can say, yeah, I was there too, that helps lessen any maybe self-consciousness around this, that if we really want to be doing a service to our clients and our patients, we need to really be doing the training and the teaching of this correctly.
Yes, thank you for that. And I think in that same area, okay, I'll be 36 in a couple weeks. So I was in college, what is that, like 18 years ago now, which is a long time. I don't remember learning intuitive eating in school. And Sam and I both went to Penn State. Sam is younger than me, so she might remember, but I don't remember that being part of the curriculum. And I'm curious from your perspective, is it now more standardized practice to include this in the curriculum? Are universities picking it up? Is the Academy of Nutrition promoting it? Can we get that instead of the obesity training as the front page of the Academy's website?
I know, right?
What do you think about all of these pieces?
There's a couple of things. Yes, it's happening at some universities. In fact, when I train people, I like to ask them, how did you come across intuitive eating? And someone just told me they actually, I think it was Cornell, where they actually had a whole class in intuitive eating and health at every size. It's like, okay, yay. Some people have been exposed to it in their internship. Some people have had to read the book in a counseling class, but there hasn't really been a standardized training around it. And as far as oh my God, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they have so many conflicts of interest tied into weight loss. In fact, did I ever tell you about the backstory about when Elise and I spoke at Fancy?
No, I know that your room was packed out and there was students
all
all over the floor.
But today's secret sharing stuff.
Love that.
So I will tell you the backstory of this because it kind of informs what I'm about to say. So in 2019, for the first time, Elise and I spoke together on a national conference. And you're right, Sammy, the room was overfilled. I mean, people were sitting on the floors and
I was against the wall.
It was so exciting to see that and the energy afterward. But what happened leading up to that, you have to submit your slides ahead of time, fine, no big deal. I think 2 weeks before the talk, I get an email from it's not a CEO, the chief education officer wanting citations. And I replied back, you must not have read the accompanying citations of over 200 studies that I submitted, And then she said, we need them on the slides. Basically, they audited our slides. I've never had that happen before. And it had, especially a pushback with health at every size and especially the health at every size and the anti-dieting message. They really had a problem with that. But it's like, you know what? I'm so research-based. It was not a problem putting the studies on the slides. So I did that. And I talked to other speakers and they didn't go through that kind of audit thing. So that was really disappointing to see when they had people speaking at that time on keto and other kinds of things. So I would love to see our profession get behind intuitive eating. In fact, I can't tell you the amount of dietitians who I've talked to and trained over the years who are thinking about giving up their careers because they really were just sick of working in this weight-centric model. And then by some way they discovered intuitive eating. And it's like, oh my God, it was life-changing for them on a personal level, but then working with people in a way that's effective and actually feels good and is gratifying was a game changer for them,
I know Jenna and I can both relate to that. That's very similar to our stories where we were like, we're out of here. This is we just feel like unfulfilled and it feels shameful. And then we found intuitive eating. But to go on top of your story, that is amazing to hear about how the room was packed out, but that is very disappointing that you were treated differently with, because you were talking about health at every size and things that, when we look at A&D, their website is eatright, heavy air quotes, .org. So I always say, when we think about intuitive eating and principle number 3, make peace with food, right? It's like, okay, well, they're insinuating that there's a right way to eat just from their website. So it's.
Yeah. And yet, and while this can be discouraging and diet culture is increasing in its ferocity, I am still so hopeful because I see so many health professionals coming into this training. We have now over 2,000 people in over 40 countries, and we're getting more physicians. And it's like, yay. The thing that I just can't wrap my head around is all the research showing that dieting doesn't work, causes harm, predicts weight gain, increases weight stigma, increases risk of eating disorders, increases weight cycling, which has its own health concerns, is that it's not looked at by the policymakers. In fact, when that policy came out recently from the American Academy of Pediatrics on kids and weight loss, I thought, okay, you haven't read every study. Maybe there's some research in there. Go read the paper. So the part that had all the research, 78 pages documenting why they thought it was a good idea, I was blown away by the amount of short-term studies that they included and did not look at eating disorders. It was just unbelievable to me. And so, what we really need is policy change, and something I plan to do. It's on my agenda. I don't know if I'll get it done this year. I hope that I will, but I'm going to do a weight science talk and just put it onto YouTube so that anybody can go watch this. I'll have all the citations, all hyperlinkable. So at least there's a point at which someone can go and look and start questioning the research on all of this. It's mind-blowing.
That would be amazing. And if there's any way that we can help spread that message, if we can take the audio from it and put an intro and say, hey, everyone, here's Evelyn's talk on weight science, and then just make it an episode, however we can help.
That would be awesome. I will be contacting you in the future.
Yeah. That would be wonderful.
And then I'm thinking about, do you know Dr. Gregory Dodell on Instagram? He's known as Everything Endocrine.
We've had him on here before. He's fantastic.
We love him.
We love him. I want him to be my
I love him too. I do too. But it took him 10 years to come around, with his wife being a psychologist who's anti-diet, and so it's all this unlearning, and then it's getting into this place of cognitive dissonance. I think it's really part of the path, at least for health professionals, when you've been trained in the medical model that there's a right way to be. And when you start looking at all this other kind of research, so what I encourage people to do is read the research and decide for yourself. They can send me an email. I'll send you the research. I've got it. Decide for yourself and see, and the harm that's happening. And I don't know if you've had Virginia Soule-Smith on your podcast yet. Her new book, Fat Talk.
Not yet, but I've seen the book. It's on my list. Still haven't read it yet.
I'm about it's a must read.
Jenna's showing it on the camera right now.
Thank you. And it's aimed at parents, but the research is so good. And it's on the New York Times bestseller list as we speak right now. And so that gives me hope too, that this messaging is getting out there in terms of all the harm that it's causing. It's just unbelievable to me, this culture that we're living in.
Well, Jenna, I don't want to finish it off without giving you a last thought question. So
no, my brain is just like buzzing because it's just so refreshing to hear. Evelyn, first of all, your energy is just like electric, which I know is partly why for all of your success, besides your incredible brain and all of the work that you do. But the way that you share this message it's so inspiring, because you have recognized in this conversation that there is nuance and there are different scenarios where, you take intuitive eating and you make it work for you in whatever stage and season of life that you're in. And I think, like Sam brought up, it gets lost in the just eat the cookie that's being promoted. Yeah. And I just am so excited to have people listen to this episode and really understand like the roots of what this message really means and what it's all about. So I have the chills. I'm super just inspired and grateful for your time today, and also kind of want to go surfing.
Oh, yay.
Besides the point.
You've sparked the love of intuitive eating and surfing for Jenna today.
There you go.
And Evelyn, to close us out, before you tell people where they can best find you, if someone's listening to this episode, let's say they're newer to intuitive eating, they've heard of it before, but maybe they're too afraid to jump in and to leave dieting behind. What would you want them to remember? If they don't remember anything else from this episode, but one thing, what would you want them to know and remember?
Well, first of all, it's really understandable that they'd be afraid. That's so understandable in the culture that we're living and all the fear mongering that has been there. That's one thing. I'm going to tell them two things. That I actually have a free intuitive eating guide on my Instagram, that one section where you can have a guide. Mm-hmm. And what I did is I took people through the 10 principles of intuitive eating, but I did it in 3 categories. The first category is there'd be prompts for each principle based on where you think you are. For someone who is ambiguous and not sure, but curious, so that might be that person. So the prompt for, diet culture might be different for that person versus someone who's brand new at it versus someone who's been doing it for a long time. That might be something they can do. So I would say, first of all, it's really valid. And then go check it out. Go read some free stuff. We've got stuff on the website. We've got stuff on Instagram, and see and looking at, how much right now is diet culture taking up your brain space, and what might you be able to be doing instead in terms of energy and brain space if that wasn't there. And the thing that still gives me chills are the people that contact us without unsolicitedly, like, I'm an artist and my art came back. I'm an actor, because we fail to well, I think when you've been in diet culture for so long, it's kind of like in California, we love our cars and sometimes we don't wash them enough. And so you get your car washed and then you're like, oh my God, I can see. How was I seeing before? So that's kind of like what diet culture is like. You're just so used to it. And then there's this fear if you do anything different. You don't have to go all in. You can go little steps. And one of the things that I like to emphasize is you don't have to be 100% into intuitive eating. It is so normal to be having a foot in diet culture. I would not have the expectation that you're coming in all in. It doesn't make you, I had a patient ask me, does it make me a bad intuitive eater? I go, absolutely not. I had a patient who said, Evelyn, I still have hopes of losing weight. Does that make me a bad intuitive eater? Absolutely not. But what I'm hearing is binary, all or none, good or bad, which is what diet culture is. And you can have a level of freedom and ease with your eating and your body. It's a gift you give to yourself, but it's also a practice. And if you're really, really scared, then what it might mean is working with a certified intuitive eating counselor for some guidance.
Thank you so much for all of those tips and just such a beautiful message. So where can people find you, Evelyn? Where is the best place for them to go?
Oh my gosh. If you're looking for books, wherever you find bookstores. So, intuitive eating workbook, if you're looking to get action steps doing, if you want to understand the model, get the intuitive eating book, 4th edition. I also have a daily intuitive eating for every day, which is 365 days of intuitive eating, little tiny bite-sized prompts. So those are some things to be thinking about. And for the health professionals out there, I'd really encourage you to get training in intuitive eating. Would love to see you. Yeah.
Awesome. And they can do that at intuitiveeating.org, correct?
Yeah. Or they go to my website and sign up that way. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Or send an email. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of What the Actual Fork Pod. We know there are a lot of pods out there, and we are so grateful that you are here listening with us.
So if you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, like, share with all of your friends and faves, and don't forget to rate and review and let us know what you want to hear more of. The more we hear from you, the more that we can make these episodes exactly what you want. We would also love to connect with you on Instagram at WhatTheActualForkPod.
We promise to continue to bring you the hottest topics, greatest guests, and the most fun you can possibly have fighting diet culture bullshit. We love you, we appreciate you, and we will see you next week for more fun.